All right, welcome to the value and creativity of queer stories. Our book panel is part of Vancouver Pride's pop-up Pride events, which are running all week. For more information, you can visit vancouverpride.ca/events. As we begin, I do want to acknowledge that we are meeting on the unceded and traditional lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. For Rorcat Reads, reconciliation is more than a ceremonial acknowledgement. It's also an opportunity to learn about the true history of this land and acknowledge the unjust treatment of the people whose lands we occupy, both in the past and today. My name is Trisha Magera, and I'm really excited to be here tonight. I'm one half of Rorcat Reads, which is a queer and nerdy website and community in Vancouver. We focus a lot on books, D&D, and cats, and it's the book part that brings us here tonight. I'm here with a few local authors. We've got Michelle Osgood, Danny Ramadan, and Tanya Boteju. So I want to just bring up quickly that we are going to have two drawings for $25 book gift certificates to Iron Dog Books. We'll be doing a drawing for that around 7:30, so get excited. But I want to get to know each of you and to hear a little bit about the books that you have written, and I think in some cases, books that you are working on and releasing soon. So let's start with Michelle Osgood. You are the author of the Better to Kiss You With series, which includes the Better to Kiss You With, Huntsman, and Moon Illusion. They're really adorable. I have enjoyed reading them so much. I guess I would kind of describe them as queer, feminist, fantasy romance novels, and they were just so much fun. So I know you have a reading prepared for us today. Is there anything else you want to tell us about your work before we get to that?
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, Trisha. I just would say they're all set in Vancouver, so if that's something you're interested in, so am I. Yeah, I'm going to read a bit from my first book, The Better to Kiss You With, just from chapter 4. Wow, Deanna said, still laughing. I can't believe you knew that there are 37 subspecies of Canis lupus. I mean, who knows that? They were walking home from Darby's public house after trivia night, and their teammates had headed in other directions or bummed a ride from Nathan. Since that was about the only answer I got right all night, I wouldn't be too impressed, Jamie demurred. No one else knew it, though. Deanna shook her head, exhilarated at their win. The night was chilly but clear, and although neither of them had gloves on, they both walked with their hands at their sides, when it would have been easiest to tuck their cold fingers into their pockets. The narrow sidewalk meant that they could either walk one behind the other, or, as they were, close enough that with every other step, Deanna felt Jamie's arm graze her own. It was imagined, Deanna knew, but she could almost swear she felt heat at every accidental touch. And the touches weren't accidental. Not entirely. She hadn't been sure if her attraction to Jamie had been reciprocated. Tonight had definitely confirmed that it was. They'd spent the night beside each other, squished thigh to thigh in a small booth with 5 of Deanna's friends. And even when Max ducked out as soon as the quiz had ended, leaving Jamie with room to move over, she hadn't moved away. She'd stayed, pressed long and lean against Deanna's side as they'd enjoyed the free pitcher their win had earned them. Hyper-aware of the press of Jamie's leg against her own, the light fabric of her dress and Jamie's jeans all that was between them, Deanna had found it difficult to follow the conversation. Once, Jamie had leaned back, casually, and there'd been the light touch of an arm against Deanna's back. Nathan had met her eyes across the table and quickly, secretly grinned, before asking their teammate Sadie how her house hunting was going. Deanna had let the conversation wash over her then, nursing the rest of her beer, and, after several moments of agonizing internal debate, had slowly leaned back. She'd given Jamie plenty of time to move her arm, if she wanted, but apparently Jamie hadn't. It was as though Deanna was reliving her first childhood crush all over again, as she felt Jamie's arm, warm and steady, against her shoulders. Now, as they walked home in the dark, Deanna decided it was time to stop beating around the bush. The next time Jamie's hand brushed her own, she caught the other woman's fingers. Jamie didn't hesitate. Her fingers wrapped firmly around Deanna's own. and Deanna was sure that without that solid grip, she'd have floated straight up into the night sky. She ducked her head to hide her grin and caught Jamie's glance out of the corner of her eye. Deanna should say something, probably, but it was so unbearably sweet to just walk hand in hand that she couldn't bring herself to speak. They walked the final blocks to their building in silence, and it was the furthest thing from uncomfortable as Jamie's thumb slid casually over Deanna's wrist. The light touch sent Deanna's senses skittering until it felt as if all the nerves in her body had gathered in that one spot. When they reached their building and Jamie pulled her hand away to reach for her keys, Deanna had to take a deep breath of the cool air to keep from pushing Jamie against the glass doors and taking a fistful of Jamie's short hair so she could drag Jamie's mouth down to hers. As though Jamie could read Deanna's mind, she cast a glance back over her shoulder. A gleam of heat in her eyes had every muscle in Deanna's body pulled tight. Deanna tried to maintain a neutral expression, but the knowing tilt in Jamie's chin nearly undid her. Thank you.
Oh, that was great. I like the start of that reading that hints a little bit at a theme of the book.
It's werewolves.
Yeah. Excellent. Danny, I'd like you to go next if that's all right. You're the author of The Clothesline Swing, which I have read and is a beautiful book about immigration and trauma and death, and also finding beauty in the midst of that and purpose and meaning. I'd love for you to read, I think not from The Clothesline Swing, but from the book that is coming out. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So thank you so much for hosting me. I really appreciate it. As you said, my name is Danny Ramadan, and my pronouns are he and him. And I'm thankful that I'm talking to you today from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. As an immigrant, as a refugee, somebody who came here from Syria, it's important to me to do the land acknowledgement as I step tenderly on this land that I wasn't invited to participate in colonizing. Yes, I have written The Clothesline Swing, which was the book that made me famous, I guess. It's a good book that I really love. All the gifts that it keeps on giving. But today I'm going to treat you to one of the very first times that I'm reading from the Foghorn Echoes. The Foghorn Echoes is a novel coming out in August 2022, which is this year, I assume. I don't know. Time doesn't make any sense anymore. And it's a novel about two queer Syrian refugees. One is internally displaced and lives in Damascus. The other is a refugee here in Canada who lives in Vancouver. And they share a common trauma in their past, and each of them is dealing with that trauma their own way. So the one in Damascus has locked his doors upon himself and chose isolation. And the one in Vancouver has opened all the doors and windows and chose escapism. All right, so this is from Jossem. His name is Jossem, and he is from Vancouver. He's writing from Vancouver. My father stands in the corner of the club, angry, dark-featured, hard eyes and sharp fingers pointing at me. Our eyes lock as he flickers in the jolting beams of light like a broken neon sign. His face is never obstructed by the sea of shirtless bodies dancing to the pulsing beat. In one flash, my father smiles at me, and in the next, his face is streaked with blood. I didn't kill you, I hiss through clenched teeth, the words lost in the throb of the DJ's music. I bob my head to the beat, and my fingers find the little baggie in my pocket. I look away from my father to the faces of my friends dancing in the crowd. Michael makes out with a random, pulling him closer and grabbing his ass. He kisses him with opened eyes. Their blue turned transparent in the black light and glows like a demon's. Our eyes meet, but his smile is half blocked by the random. I look away. Brian tries to take a selfie with all of us. He hates photos taken with the front-facing camera on his phone, so grainy and blurred. So he uses the back instead, clicking blindly on his screen before flipping the phone around and studying his handiwork. He looks disappointed and wants to take another. The DJ slams the air with his fist as he spins another rendition of some unintelligible voice echoing syllables over and over. Whoop, whoop, whoop. The beat drops and everyone jumps, and as they land, the earth shakes and my father's ghost reappears under the spotlight, shattered, broken, his tibia rocketed through the muscle and skin and clothes, pointing at me. The boys dance around him like wolves circling prey. I shudder. My hands squeeze the baggy, sweaty, and slippery in my palm. Again, I see Wasim's foot hitting my father's face on that damn rooftop. I'm gonna pause here. The two of them were making out on a rooftop 10 years earlier in the book, and the father found out about it, and then a fight ensued, and by mistake, one of them pushed the father off the rooftop. The memory shakes as if electricity runs through my eyes. The music is muffled, the vocalist barely audible, and the faces around me blurred. It is my feet kicking my father's face. It's Wasim's feet kicking my father's face. It's my feet kicking Wasim's face. It's his feet kicking me. My feet, his feet, my feet, his feet. It's both of us. Oop, oop, oop. My phone vibrates in my pocket. I ignore it. It vibrates again. I pull it out and see a blinding sky blue and Arda's name under a photo I took of him. Big smile, white teeth, the color of his military uniform unbuttoned and showing his chest hair. Can't, I text him, I'll call you later. He texts me a heart emoji. I look up and my father's ghost has gone. He won't return this time, I know it. The music fills the air, beats meant to raise my heartbeat and sounds meant to turn me on. It's computer generated. No actual music instruments were harmed in the making of this song. I giggle at my own joke. I slam into someone. I'm alert. My naked upper body brushes against the soft hair of his chest. I smile my crooked smile, narrow pupils, shifty eyes, an amused look on his face. His high. The universe send waves of sounds back to Earth. I am stoned for sure. I've seen it on the news. The universe has been speaking to us, and for millions of years we hadn't been able to hear it. Whoop, whoop, whoop. What a stupid sound it makes. It echoes like the bass in this DJ set. It's been speaking to us and we couldn't hear it because we're deaf to its song. Two black holes, I've seen it on the news, and on the opposite ends of the universe collapsed into each other millions of years ago and released the energy of 1,000,000 billion suns into the dark, silent space around them. They crashed like two eggs rolling in a bowl, and the waves vibrated across the whole galaxy. They merged into a bottomless pit, eating at planets and aimless rocks. The sound of death got weaker and softer and sharper until it reached Earth. Scientists recorded it. I've heard it on the news, and they say it goes whoop, whoop, whoop. Such a dumb sound. These waves remain despite the years. They won't go away. My father's ghost is back, glimmering in the corner. I have failed at erasing him. I am cursed forever. I am doomed for death. I avenged you, I whispered, but he won't go away. One more hit and he'll be gone. One more round, another bloody red bill. The boy strokes the hair on the back of my neck. What's your name? He asks. Hussam. Hisham? Hussam. Ahmed? Huh? Huh? Just call me Sam. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing the Foghorn Echoes coming out in August.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Tanya, I'm excited to hear your reading. You're the author of Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens, as well as Bruised. I believe the excerpt is coming from Bruised, and it is, I believe, my favorite coming out scene of anything ever. Your books are full of joy and celebration, even when they're dealing with topics that are quite difficult. And I feel like this coming out scene was just the epitome of that. So I'm very excited to hear.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and so wonderful to be with this crew of folks, and also just mesmerized by our wonderful ASL interpreters too. Thank you to you both. I am going to read from Bruise, which just came out last year. It's about a girl who has lost her parents to a car accident that she survived, and she's taken to bruising herself as a form of coping with her grief. And so when a friend introduces her to roller derby, which is a pretty brutal sport, she sees it as an opportunity for more bruising, but she finds out that it's a lot more than that, of course. But this scene is also one of my favorite scenes to read, especially at queer events, because it's very full of queer joy. It's when Daya, the main character, has just spent her first night with a girl, and they are trying to sneak out of the house that Daya now lives in with her uncle and aunt, who are very over-the-top musical-loving people, and very opposite to who Daya is. And so she's trying to escape before they can find out, but they find out, and this is their reaction. Suddenly, Vicky was back on her feet. You know what? This calls for a capital C celebration. She disappeared into the living room, leaving Shanti and me speechless, and Priyam grinning from ear to ear at us as though he knew exactly what Vicky was about to do, which I can't imagine he actually did. And then music started playing from the living room. Seasons of Love from Rent. A minute later, Vicky swept back into the kitchen with 2 small rainbow flags on sticks, because, obviously, she had a secret stash of tiny rainbow flags somewhere. She poked these into the middle of the avocado toast sitting untouched on Shanti's and my plates. Then she joined Priyam on the other side of the table, and they began to sing along with the song. They were serenading us, celebrating our gayness. Shanti would never want to come back here. I never wanted to come back here. But then I heard a fit of giggles from beside me and looked over. Shanti had picked up her flag and was waving it in time to the song, her face glowing with actual amazement and delight. The encouragement from Shanti caused Priyam to stand and invite Vicky into a waltz around the kitchen as they continued to sing. I tried to catch Shanti's eye to communicate my very real torment, but she just sat back in her chair, trained her eyes on the dancing duo, and kept waving the damn flag. Giving up on any hopes of making an early departure from this celebration, I slumped back in my chair, folded my arms, and glared as hard as I could at Priyam and Vicky, who were somehow incorporating at least 4 or 5 different dance styles into a number that, as far as I knew of the musical, was normally performed standing perfectly still. But then there was nothing normal about this. As I watched them flounce around the kitchen with Shanti's rainbow flag flicking every so often into my sightline, the past 12 hours seeped into my brain. The thorny situation with Kat, an amazing but still mystifying night with Shanti, and now this. The only thing I'd set out to do, kill it on the track, had so far been complicated by confusing dynamics. And the kind of stuff I avoided like the plague, intimacy, my aunt and uncle, musicals, seemed to be invading me from all sides. Just as these thoughts began to set panic alight in my chest once again, Priam and Vicky were reaching the climax of the song and trying to replicate the numerous voices emerging out of our stereo from the living room, including the one that goes super high at the end. As both of them tried to reach that note, Shanti reached over and seized my hand, finally turning her head my way to look at me with what could only be described as a combination of amusement, disbelief, and euphoria. I'll admit it was difficult for my displeasure and panic to sustain itself in the face of her surprising but equally enduring reaction. But what surprised me even more was when she squeezed the crap out of my hand in her excitement, and what I felt, instead of the usual pain in my palm, was something else entirely in my chest. After the show-stopping number ended, Vicky and Priam took their bows, something they found a way to squeeze in at least 6 or 7 times a day, and seated themselves back at the table. Still beaming at us through slightly heavier breaths, they began eating their breakfast. Shanti looked at me, shrugged, and let go of my hand to start eating as well.
Thank you. So great. Well, we have a pretty diverse group of stories here, which I love. Romance, YA, contemporary fiction. But all of your books are at least partially set in Vancouver. And since this is a Vancouver pop-up Pride, I'd love to hear a little bit about what it is about this city that inspired you to set your story here. Michelle, would you like to go first?
Sure, yeah. So I'm from Calgary. So I moved to Vancouver in 2014. And I just think the city has such a long history of not just queer existence, but queer resistance as well. That being here as a queer person with, having Davy, having Commercial, they're just physical spaces where queer people exist and have existed for generations. And that just felt, I don't know, like the place where I could picture queer people living and thriving.
Yeah, it's a great city for that. Danny or Tanya, do you have any thoughts about setting your books in Vancouver?
Yeah, well, I'll just say, I actually don't even name Vancouver in Brews, but it's definitely what I was thinking of when I was writing the book, partially because the roller derby scene is quite different depending on what city you're in. And I don't play roller derby myself, but I'm more familiar, of course, with the roller derby league here and the sort of, I guess, the culture of it a little bit more. And both of my books are set sort of on the Pacific West Coast somewhere, and I never actually named the city. But it just felt right to try and base it around, I guess, the roller derby culture here versus somewhere else that I wasn't familiar with.
Mm-hmm. For me, to be honest, like when I was writing the book, one of the thoughts that came to mind is that I could set, because half of the book is set in Damascus and the other half is set in Vancouver. And literally there are 20 chapters in there, 10 of them are titled Vancouver over and over. And I could have, if I wanted to sell the book, if I wanted to ensure that I sell the book in the US market, I could have switched that to Seattle. And for the non-traveling regular American person, that would have been, I wouldn't have to change much, to be honest. But at the same time, I think Vancouver is a place that means a lot to me. It's a place where I found maturity, where I found my place in the world, where I felt that I have arrived to a place where I see myself expanding and becoming who I wanted to be. So I think I wanted to honor this place through that, through looking at the character who in my book also arrives one way or another in a very convoluted way into becoming the person he's supposed to be.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. That kind of speaks to, this is a panel about queer creativity, the value of queer stories, and unofficially about queer joy. I know that a lot of times, both personally, just as being queer people in the world, we experience trauma. And in each of your books, there are elements of trauma either on the page or in this background stories that are still resonating throughout the book. Why did each of you decide to handle trauma in the way that you did? And why was it important that you address it in that way?
I can go first if folks are comfortable with that. I think we are complex as humans to begin with. I think that when we think of trauma, there are three layers of what that means. There is what actually happened. So the traumatic event, that if we had a camera focused on that traumatic event and that camera recorded everything, that's what happened. And there's what we think actually happened. So us as a traumatized person, what we think is happening to us or happened to us, and what is the impact of that trauma on us. And then what we're willing to share about that trauma, what we're willing to talk about to others, to ourselves, on our pages. And I think that navigating those three layers is quite inviting to me, to be honest. Like, I know that I'm navigating trauma and that trauma is difficult in itself, but actually looking at those three layers and how I can take them into the creativity of my book and turn them into a character just is a lot of fun to me. And I think that comes through when I'm writing the book. It comes through the complexity of how I write about trauma and the joy that I try to show people seeking at the end of the day, the resilience that they show through understanding those three layers of their traumatic experience.
Mm.
Yeah,
I like the idea of trauma as a character. That's fascinating.
Yeah, same here. I find that really resonates with me just in terms of the writing process and what our stories tend to revolve around. The wounds, I guess, that we experience, and as humans, and then as our characters that propel us forward, right, in our lives, that sort of drive what we're trying to achieve or what we think we need. And so, with both books, but maybe more so Bruised, I was asking the question, why would somebody be attracted to roller derby? And of course, there's lots of reasons, but what came out was this girl who was grieving, and who had made a trauma mean something really specific that she needed to then address in a way that was actually really unhealthy, but that made sense for, I think, how, especially because I write for young adults too, and I'm writing teenage stories. It's really hard. It's a hard time, and we make so many things mean so much, I think, more so at that age. And everything's so big around that time, and of course, so if something is already big, the character makes it even mean so much more. And so my character Daya, really, it was important to treat that grief that she's experiencing and what she makes that trauma mean for her, really carefully and gently. And especially when I'm writing for young adults, who I also teach, all the time too, to hold them gently as well. I think that's what I think about a lot when I'm writing about trauma or grief or these painful things in my writing, is who is my main audience? What are they already experiencing? How are they gonna, interact with these things? And so that's why the joy part is so important too. I find that for me, it has to balance out.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying there, Tanya. And yeah, I think trauma can be so personal and so individual. And like how Danny's saying, like you choose what you share or don't share. So I think in my books, I really liked having individuals struggling with something traumatic, but then it's their chosen family, or in this case, their werewolf pack, who's like there to help and support and like hold your hand as you move through something that's difficult. Maybe they can't fix it for you. Maybe they can't hurt whoever hurt you, but maybe they can be there while you heal. And I think that's something valuable for our community to have and to hear, that you're not alone in this.
Yeah, I love that. Both within the books, and it makes me think of, by the stories that each of you have written, that is not being alone. So everybody who gets to read your stories has that feeling of, oh, someone understands like what I'm going through, or those feelings that come with those experiences. And so you are kind of being found families to each of your readers, which is beautiful.
A very nice thing to say.
Before we move on to the next question, it's kind of a weird segue. I didn't think this through, but we do have a couple gift cards to give away. So what we're going to do is, everybody who is watching right now, you can put in the chat, both on Twitch and at the Vancouver Pride Facebook page, a number between 1 and 100. And we will randomly draw a winner that will be announced at the end of the stream. But so right now you can get to it, put in a number between 1 and 100. Try not to duplicate a number if you're going through the chat. And we will come back to that at the end. And we will have 2 lucky winners who get a $25 gift card to Iron Dog Books. So back to the conversation. As we said, very diverse group of stories that are being told. We are all united by an aspect of our identity, that we all identify as queer in some way. But that is just one aspect of our identities. And I know that each of you bring your whole self when you write a book. So I'd love to know about what other aspects of your identity you wanted to infuse your writing with, and how you did that, why it was important, just kind of all of those intersections of identity and how you represent that.
Yes, I can go first, if that's all right. So I'm polyamorous, I identify as solo poly. And that's a little tricky in the romance world. Like, romance as a genre is very much one person, 2 people, they're together, happy ending forever. So in my 3rd book, Moon Illusion, I really wanted to just include some polyamory in a, this isn't, the love story is still between like 2 characters, but one of the characters happens to have like another relationship on the side, like casually dating. And that doesn't go away. Like, even though there's this big epic romance between my 2 main characters, one of them's still polyamorous, and that's not an issue. It doesn't come up. It doesn't like present a problem. It just is the way that people are in our community sometimes. And I think it's important to show, especially in like the romance genre, that not queer love stories aren't necessarily going to look the same way that the heterosexual love stories we've been seeing for decades, right? So I think it's nice to kind of like elbow out a bit of space there.
Yeah, that creativity that queer stories offer, of it's not just a difference in gender or sexuality, but also in what relationships can look like. That's awesome that you're representing that.
I'll just add that for me, it was really important to that my protagonists were brown, and they're Sri Lankan, which is where my parents are from, it's very rare to see South Asians who are not Indian. And so, that actually didn't come supernaturally at the very beginning. It's very strange. When I first started writing Kings, I started writing my character as a white character, because that's exactly what was going through my brain all the time, because that's what we've been reading. I've been reading my whole life. And so I actually had to make a intentional shift to write my character as Sri Lankan, and now it comes very naturally, and it makes a lot of sense to me, but it's still very intentional, and intentional to make sure that, actually I would say, like, the majority of my characters are not white, and that is really intentional.
I think it's funny. I think that, so I was on a panel in 2019, And somebody asked me, so what is your next project? And I was like, I'm going to write the Foghorn Echoes, which is the book that I'm releasing soon. And the person was like, so what is it about? And I'm like, well, it's about two queer Syrian refugees who one of them is doing this and one of them is doing that. And the person paused and was like, isn't the clothesline swing about two queer Syrian refugees? I'm like, that's exactly the point. That is literally what I want to do, because I didn't write the manual on queer Syrian refugees. This is not how storytelling works. I didn't write Syrian queer refugees for dummies. This is a novel that I wrote, and now I wrote a different novel. So that question and that situation really stayed with me. And one thing that I insisted on doing is that my new characters have nothing to do with me. Like the first characters in the Clothesline Swing have a lot to do with me. There are storytellers, there are people who like video games, there are people who are quite loving, quite outwardly with their emotions, which I think of myself as that kind of person. But the Foghorn Echoes, just because I want to divert as much as possible from there, while also keeping the characters gay and Syrian and refugees, they literally have no intersectionality with who I am otherwise. They're just gay Syrian refugees, just like the people in the books before them.
Yeah, I love that you didn't write the manual. That's a good line. One of the things that we talked briefly about before we went live was about D&D. I love D&D. It's collaborative storytelling. And one of the things that I have noticed is that when I play with queer people, the stories that we come up with are often very chaotic, very creative, and usually they don't really care too much about the rules. And so I find that it just opens things up in a really awesome way. And since this is a panel about the value and creativity of queer stories, I'd love to hear from each of you. What do you think a queer perspective offers when you're telling stories?
Well, I think just building off what you said, I can only speak from my queer perspective, but I think that open-endedness or that like room, I think, is part of it. At least I feel that I'm not as bound maybe to certain, I don't know, tropes or expectations in maybe some ways that other authors might be. And I feel like because there is a lot of fluidity in gender and sexuality, that I can move in those spaces a bit more easily, or at least I feel like that for myself. I know not everybody feels the freedom to do that. And so in my books, I feel like it provides more variety in my characters of the kinds of people, the kinds of stories, the kinds of identities that they inhabit. I feel a little bit more freedom, I guess.
Yeah, I love a good trope, but we also need new ones.
Yeah.
And I think too, when you're always kind of looking outside of what society is or what it's supposed to be, it can be really interesting to turn that othering lens like back on what we consider to be normal. I think queer writing has it can do that really interestingly, right? Just turning things on their head and like, oh, I really didn't think that that's weird. But when you put it like that, when you frame it this way, when I'm looking at it from this perspective instead of straight on, like, oh, maybe there are things here that aren't natural.
Instead of straight on, that was good.
I'm actually a professional writer, so.
I don't know what queer perspective offers into storytelling, but what I know is that I'm so tired of straight perspective and their offering to storytelling. We have been hearing straight perspectives and their offering of storytelling for the last 300 years. And specifically white straight men, and all of their stories have been written in every way possible, over and under and all over the place. So I am done with that. And I think offering a queer perspective, a queer intersectional perspective with some brownness in there, some indigenous in there, if anything else, it just offers a break from that stagnant storytelling that we have seen so much of.
Yeah, I agree. When I started reading predominantly queer books, I found it was very difficult to go back. Especially, luckily, there's so much out there now, which is wonderful. There's no need to read straight white men anymore, so stop it.
I mean, there is the occasional straight white man that I was like, oh, okay, all right, I see. But when I say that, and the last time I read a book by a straight white man was maybe Less, which was released in 2017. So I feel like it has been a couple of years now.
Once every 5 years, they get a pass.
Yeah.
Speaking of the kind of, we've had a lot of opportunities for queer authors lately. I'd love to know, you guys know a lot more than I do. Do you see more opportunities for queer creatives now than in the past? I guess we'll start with the positive. Are there more opportunities, and in what way?
I think there's definitely more demand, and YA, I can only speak from the genre that I'm writing in, but like, and I see this in, you know, the kids I teach too, like they also are tired of the same old stories, and they want to see their, you know, their lives reflected. And I'm looking out at, you know, just one classroom of kids, and there's so many identities represented, and they want to see themselves. And so that, I think, YA holds a really special place. I've noticed for queer stories to be told, and like more queer stories, like Danny was saying, you know, like you can tell 2 stories about 2 Syrian refugees who are queer, but they are going to be completely different. Every single story is going to be completely different. And we need more, you know, we need a critical mass of stories, of queer stories, to really represent everything that's going on and what we're seeing in the real world.
Man, that's the next book panel title, Critical Mass of Queer Stories.
I was just about to say critical mass of queer stories. That sounds like my kind of afternoon. I appreciate you saying that. I think there's a lot of demand for queer stories, but what I think is the challenge is that there's still a table that has chairs that needs to be filled. So there's a table with, like, I don't know, 24 chairs, and 20 of them is for white straight authors. And then those 4 chairs over there, you for queer folks of color, you folks of color, all of you can play musical chairs on those 4 chairs. Each of you will be released once every 5 years. And that's I don't want to play that game. Honestly, I don't want to play that game. I want to release a book every other year. I don't want to be the only queer Syrian writer out there. And I am the only queer Syrian writer out there, unless you're listening, queer Syrian writers, and you want, please talk to me. I'm on Twitter. I have like 10,000 followers. Please come to me, and let's talk. But currently, I feel that I'm the only person over there from my identity, from my little queer community, and I don't think that that's cool. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities, way more than, I don't know, 5 years ago, but that doesn't mean that the options are not still limited.
Yeah, I would really agree with that. And I think too, we have to look maybe also just outside of traditional narrative storytelling. Like we were talking about video games a bit earlier, and I think we're seeing a lot more queer storylines in video games and stuff. And I know mobile gaming, like that's a huge thing. And you know, there are lots of the like online mobile games that are kind of like role-playing based. A lot of those are queer. So I do think there are opportunities, but like Danny's saying, there's a cap too on how much money and resources are available to the non-normative folks out there. So it can be competitive against each other in ways that are really not helpful. When again, there are 20 other seats, open up some of those.
Yeah.
I know. And like the funny thing is, like the best-selling lists in Canada released every week from the CBC, 90% of the people on the top 10 are people of color or queer people. It's clearly that the community out there, the mainstream community, wants our stories.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm not one of those like Scrooge McDuck writers who just wants the space for myself. I actually want you to come and swim with me in that pile of money in my locker. Not that I have one, but we didn't want to talk about the money in my locker. Anyway, I just feel like I just feel like there are certain barriers that makes no sense, that they're just there now just because they have been there for since the beginning of time, and they just makes no sense anymore, and I think we all can easily jump them.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for any viewers out there who want to get into storytelling, into writing as queer people? Do you have any encouragement or practical advice that you think would be useful?
I just say that you have to be the person that's going to defend your own work the most. Like publishing really can be, it's an industry, right? It's capitalism. They really care about money at the end of it. So you have to know that even if you have a really good relationship with your publisher, with your editors, like at the end of the day, you have to stand up for what you know is right in your writing. And that can be tough, but you're the author, you know, you can listen to advice, people can come to you and you can take in criticism, but at the end of the day, you have to go with your gut. And your story needs you to stand behind it because no one else is going to. We don't have the resources really in this community for you to have a whole team for a lot of us. So just know that, yeah, you got this. No, don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
Love that.
Yeah, and I would just add, you know, that you might not have the team in the industry part, but I think you have a team here. Like I have found, at least for myself, that the queer community, the you know, folks of color who are writers have been really supportive and welcoming and want to help. And, you know, form groups. So like reach out, don't be, you know, like what's the worst is that you won't hear back, you know, but in my experience, I almost always hear back. And so, you know, find support that way and don't be afraid to ask for just even for advice or, you know, a connection. I think people are pretty willing to help when they can.
I think I echo search for your community and blow your own horn because nobody else would do it for you. I echo that completely. And I say be kind to yourself. A lot of us, when we're writing, the first thought that comes to my mind is, this is shit, all of this is shit, I hate this is the worst, please stop and go play your video games. And I don't think that's every book that is printed out there in a bookstore that you read is not the first draft that the author put together. It's never that. There is 5-6 drafts, please, for me 20. There is agents that get involved, editors that get involved, copy editors that get involved, your neighbor's dog gets involved, everybody gets involved. So really believe me, the moment that you sit down and you write a word, you're not going to write the next masterpiece. It's going to be shit, and that is totally fine. Just be kind to it and see how it can grow into something beautiful.
Speaking of those projects that are growing into something beautiful, I do want to, not our last question, but second to last, hear from each of you about any upcoming projects that are coming up, any books we should put in our queues on Goodreads, or anything else that you want viewers to know about.
I'll just go first. I'm not working on anything. I'm just trying to survive a pandemic right now. So hop off that grind culture for a bit. But I'll just take one small second to plug Autostraddle. If you're interested in queer writing, it's like the only independently run queer women's media site. And they publish a lot of really interesting work from like new up and coming writers. And they're really trans inclusive, and they're working really closely to, just bring a really inclusive queer women's independent media site. So they run largely on just subscriptions and donations. So it would mean a lot to me if you just check them out.
I second that.
A third that. Really cool. Yeah.
I'll just mention, so I'm just working on a couple of projects. One definitely YA, one maybe crossing over. One of them goes back into the drag world, but is not connected to my first book. I just felt like Vancouver has this unreal drag scene, and there's so much more to say about it than what I could add into Kings. And so, I wanted to go back in there, and I've got to like interview all of these amazing drag performers, and in the journey to finishing the book. So I'm getting to the end of that, and hoping to find a home for it at some point. And then the other book I'm working on dives into the intersection between religion and queerness. And that's the YA one. I was raised Catholic, and so I have a lot to say about that particular intersection. I've always wanted to write about it, and so I'm really excited to continue diving into that world and see some of the complications and also some of the maybe hopefully hopeful parts to bring out for a lot of kids who are trying to figure that out as well.
Awesome. Is there a date attached to any of this, or it's still very much?
This is all just hoping.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to be on the lookout. That sounds great. Before we do our winning drawing, I would love to know, everybody who's watching should definitely read all of your books. And when they've finished that, if they're looking for even more recommendations, do you have any queer books that you just think are excellent and that you want everybody to read?
I'm looking at my pile of books right now. This is a collection of poetry by my friend Charlie Pitch, Why I Was Late. And this is beautiful. They're a trans masculine person who lives in Toronto. They are super freaking funny, and they deserve for you to pick up this book. It's amazing. I just finished Sure, I'll Be Your Black Friend by Ben Phillip, which I met Ben, and he is a dream. He is such a cute boy. Boy, I was like, oh my gosh. And finally, last but not least, is my friend Cicely Bell Blaine had a collection of poetry called Burning Sugar, and that is also quite fantastic. It's about spirituality, it's about connection to family, it's about queerness, it's about growing up Black. It's a lot of things, and I adored it.
I really loved the Little Blue Encyclopedia for Vivian, which is also, I think it's set in Vancouver. It's definitely set in BC. And it's a trans author. It's a really, just a charming, there are these beautiful illustrations. Like, it's just a great book if you have a chance. 10 out of 10.
I had to write mine down because I always forget when people ask this question. My mind immediately goes blank. But I'll just give you some of my top YA, queer YA. One is Juliet Takes a Breath by Gabby Rivera. Super cool, set in the 90s, feminist kind of story. Like a Love Story by Abdeen Nazemian. It's a couple years older, but unbelievable. I just read it Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe. If you haven't read that yet, it is incredible. The research, the history, just so much going on. And then a recent one, I get to meet Lizelle Sambury recently. We did an event together, and I'm just in the middle of the audiobook of Blood Like Magic. So if you like fantasy, it is so good. There's so much going on in it. And then my last one is One Last Stop. It's not YA by Casey McQuinson, but it could be YA too. It's just super awesome, like kind of supernatural, queer, female romance. Pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, I love those.
Mhm.
I would also throw in there, if you like sci-fi, The Long Way to the Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers is very good. And if you like things set on Earth, Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe is excellent, and the sequel just came out this year. Long awaited. I think we had to wait 10 years. And Butter Honey Pig Bread is also really excellent. So hopefully this keeps your bookshelves full for the next few weeks, few months. As we close out, we are going to announce our winners. The first number we had was 51, which I am told was Cheeseboard Gaming. No, just kidding. That was 50. 51 was Dawson Bisgard on Facebook. And the second number was 35, which is Cheeseboard Gaming. So don't worry, you did win. So for each of you, if you could email roarcatreads@gmail.com with your full name, email address, and postal address, we'll get those to you. So thank you for tuning in and congratulations. I do want to give a huge thank you to our interpreters. You're amazing and you did a phenomenal job. And thank you to each of our panelists, Michelle, Danny, and Tanya. It was great to hear from you and get to know you. And I sincerely encourage everybody to go buy your books immediately. I had such a good time reading them, and I'm excited for all future projects. Before we close out, I do want to remind everyone that there are more Pop-Up Pride events coming up. The Big Top Virtual Drag Show is going to feature performers of all genders and expressions, hosted by the one and only Satanics. They are bringing Scene versus Emo Part 2, which will be at 9 p.m. this Friday. So you can check out vancouverpride.ca/events for any info for that program. And the show will also have ASL interpretation, thanks to Vancouver Pride Society and TD. So thank you all for being here, and thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you all have a great night and that you fall asleep reading a queer book. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Trisha.